evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Sharri Marks, and big show tonight. What new chair Kim Williams really thinks of the ABC, that it doesn't break news, it's too self-congratulatory, vainglorious, and its record on Indigenous affairs is patchy, while its executives are guilty of pompous twaddle. His scathing assessment coming up in just a moment. As Donald Trump sweeps the New Hampshire primaries, his former advisor, Sean Spicer, will reveal who the contenders are for Trump's running mate. And Albanese is smashed for his broken promise on tax cuts, all in the middle of a cost of living crisis. One prominent Australian has tonight said that the Prime Minister should stand down.
If the Prime Minister doesn't believe in Australia Day, he ought to stand down.
Well, ABC lovies will be shocked when they hear that new chair Kim Williams has described its executives as guilty of pompous twaddle, said that the broadcaster is too self-congratulatory and that it doesn't break news. 72-year-old Williams replaces Ita Buttrose. He's a traditional classic Labor ABC person. He considers himself a public intellectual. Albanese described him as a Renaissance man when he glowingly announced the appointment.
Kim is such a perfect fit for the role, it's almost as if he were made for it. He is as much at home running media companies as he is running arts organisations, and indeed former AFL Commissioner, so engaged in sport as well. There aren't too many Australians I can think of who have both studied composition in Italy and been an AFL Commissioner. Kim is someone who gets the ABC, and he's someone who understands instinctively what a national broadcaster can and should be.
But I wonder if Albanese has actually read Kim Williams' own book, Rules of Engagement. It was published in 2014, because it has some fascinating insights about how the new chair views the ABC. Kim Williams writes that the ABC is capable of as much vainglorious behaviour as our commercial media, and is often consumed in a fountain of self-congratulatory rhetoric about itself and its centrality to independent views and reportage on Australia. He writes, "I beg to differ. I do so because we all deserve better, and we need to rid ourselves of this habit of always saying how very good we are, when it often camouflages the reality of performance and limits the opportunity to improve." Well, apart from the ABC being overly vain, Kim Williams also criticises the public broadcaster for hardly breaking any news. He writes that beyond television programs like Four Corners, Lateline, 7:30 Report and an occasional Landline, along with their splendid radio counterparts in AM, PM, The World Today and so on, the broadcaster breaks comparatively little news. The News 24 TV channel rarely breaks news, and News Radio similarly provides a valuable recital of items throughout the day, but few of them are original beyond commentary pieces. And then when it comes to the ABC's Indigenous coverage, he's also scathing, saying ABC TV has a patchy record on Indigenous matters. Overall, Kim Williams says that the ABC pales in comparison when you compare it to the SBS or NITV on Indigenous coverage. He's also highly critical of ABC executives. He writes that Australia can live without the self-important defences offered from time to time by senior ABC executives, that it is a broadcaster of unique quality, meeting areas of market weakness and underperformance by others. He writes that kind of rhetoric is pompous twaddle and ill behoves important national institutions. Pompous twaddle that ill behoves important national institutions. If the ABC employees think that Williams will be full of praise for their journalism when he starts as chair, they don't know what's about to hit them. Kim Williams writes that a deep conviction of mine is that it's unhealthy to be anything other than consciously and constantly critical of performance and delivery in any media organisation. And he says in his book that the SBS has no tickets on itself. He says it's achieved fine changes, but then he compares the SBS to the ABC, which he describes as more complex, self-protective, and a difficult creature. He suggests that energetic action is needed to shake up cultural settings, and he seems to suggest that the ABC should be turning over its staff quite regularly. Kim Williams says the ABC's behaviour in securing a contract for international broadcasting, supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in the Rudd-Gillard years, and I quote, compromised its standing as a public institution. It was worthy of gutter advocacy of the worst kind. Well, as you know, in the past week, ABC staff have been in uproar over the decision by management to excuse a presenter, Antoinette Lattouf, from 2 of her 5 days as a casual fill-in radio host, even though she was paid for all of the days. As you know, it's all very anti-Israel over at the public broadcaster. And this is another area where Kim Williams may be out of sync with his staff. In a 2014 interview that I did with Kim Williams for the Australian newspaper, he said, and I quote, "There has been a long vein in the Australian media of anti-Semitic coverage, and it is an enormously troubling thing." He said, "I'm probably unusually and acutely sensitive to anti-Semitic coverage because I feel quite strongly about it, and it is something that has to be held up whenever it happens." Oh, and by the way, Kim Williams writes in his book, and this is interesting as we approach the Australia Day debate, and as you know, the ABC's Triple J cancelled its top 100 several years ago. Well, Kim Williams says that Captain Cook is one of his many role models. Now, Kim Williams doesn't naturally love journalists. He successfully sued the former Fin Review columnist Joe Aston for nearly $100,000 after Aston wrote 30 articles on him where he compared him with the former North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il. Williams was a successful boss of Foxtel for 10 years. He then had a bitter departure from the role of CEO at News Corp after clashing with editorial leaders. He tried to undertake an extreme reform program, and this upset editors. And one of those editors, Chris Mitchell, will be on my show tomorrow night to speak about what unfolded at the time. But for now, I'm going to make one prediction. Kim Williams' tenure at the ABC will certainly be eventful for all of us watching. Well, on to federal politics. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese today made many excuses for why he's had to break his promise to Australian voters.
Are you about to break an election promise and change the stage 3 tax cuts? And if so, why?
We know that there are cost of living pressures on Middle Australia, and we're determined to follow the Treasury advice to provide assistance to them.
So when you recommitted to seeing through on your promise on on stage 3, the tax cuts, you said, "My word is my bond." What is your word worth now to Australian voters?
My determination and my job is to get the best outcome for Australians.
Now, this is a significant moment in federal politics. This is the Prime Minister standing in front of Australia, trying to worm his way out of a very clear broken promise that he wouldn't touch stage 3 tax cuts. A promise he made over 100 times, according to the opposition calculations.
My word is my bond. People are entitled to have that certainty of the tax cuts that have been legislated. When a politician makes a commitment before an election, they keep it, and I intend to do just that. What we need as well is to have that certainty. People have made assessments based upon the certainty that comes through legislated tax changes, and we intend to fulfil that.
Albanese unequivocally promised you that you could have certainty in your financial affairs, that his word was his bond, his own words. Well, it's lies like this that give all politicians a bad name. And as you heard today, Albanese claimed he was breaking his promise for the good of Middle Australia. It's quite a feat to spin a major broken promise as more tax relief. In fact, what they're trying to spin as a cost of living measure amounts to a tax hike. The reality is that 1 million Australians earning over $150,000 will be worse off. Australians did have a tax cut. It had been legislated, and now they're going to be forced to pay more. For people earning over $200,000, they were set to have a tax cut of $9,000, and that's been reduced to $4,500. For people earning $180,000, they'll be paying $2,218 more than they would have. And for Australians on a wage of $150,000, it's an extra $118. Now, these tax cuts were legislated by Scott Morrison in 2019. They were stage 3, meaning the tax cuts for lower income Australians have already gone through and taken effect. And now, after waiting 5 years for the tax cuts, which are meant to address bracket creep, Albanese will take legislation to the Parliament to increase taxes for middle Australians, for average workers. The fact that Labor has cloaked this as a cost of living measure is a farce. While for 1 million Australians, it's a tax hike, for those who do benefit, it's not going to come in until next financial year, and most people won't see any benefit, as I understand it, until they do their tax return in around 18 months' time. By then, mid-2025, inflation is expected to be close to returning to the target band of 2 to 3%. Cost of living measures are needed now, not in 18 months' time. The figures are that those earning under $135,000 a year will get an extra $932 a year in tax relief. This amounts to $18 a week. So this is the big cost of living relief, $18 a week. This is all just political spin, the appearance of doing something on the cost of living to win back voters who've deserted the Prime Minister. And Labor figures that the 1 million Australians who will now have higher taxes don't vote for them anyway. But Pauline Hanson made the point in an interview with Steve Price earlier this evening that these tax increases aren't hurting the top end of town, but ordinary Australians like herself.
I'm an ordinary Australian as well, and I've worked hard through my whole life in trying to better myself in saving, going without, and I was wanting my tax cuts. I rather put the money in my pocket like many other Australians. I know best how to spend my money instead of giving to a government who squanders the money all the time and does not spend it wisely.
And former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett went a step further and said that Albanese's lack of leadership, first on defending our National Day, but then his broken promise on tax cuts, means that he should quit as Prime Minister.
If the Prime Minister doesn't believe in Australia Day, he ought to stand down. And he ought to stand down, secondly, for what he's potentially going to do tonight, and that is throw out the tax cuts that have been legislated for a number of years and he went to the polls on. People want leadership.
Very strong comments from Jeff Kennett there. Well, the Coalition made the point that whatever minimal extra amount people in lower tax brackets will receive as a result of these changes would be lost within a couple of years when their bracket creep kicks in.
And this has got nothing to do with trying to deliver something for the Australian people. It's all a self-interested change to try and deliver a result for him.
The election was won on a lie. The election win was based significantly on this lie.
And Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor said that this tax plan is Labor's punishment of people who dare to be aspirational. He made these comments on this program last night.
He has declared war on aspiration in this country. And I tell you what, if he's declared war on aspiration, every aspirational Australian should be worried about where he's going and what he's doing.
The business community are scathing as well, with the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chief Executive Andrew McKellar saying,
The government for a long period of time, many times, hundreds of times, has said they will implement the stage 3 tax cuts.
Very true.
For business, integrity is important, and if you walk away from doing the things that you say you're going to do, then I think that is not a good thing.
Commentators like political writer Joe Kelly at The Australian say that Albanese has chosen to break faith with the Australian people in the biggest political decision of his career. And Joe Kelly makes the point that the Prime Minister's claim to restore integrity and accountability to politics has been exposed as a farce. All right, let's bring in now Sky News contributors Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy. Welcome to you both. Look, Stephen, how much is this broken promise going to hurt Albanese politically?
Well, I think this is one of the biggest decisions that the government's taken since they were elected. They've been placed in a very difficult set of economic circumstances. If they just grabbed the pork barrel and just tossed out new extra money on top of the total package that their tax cuts represent, they would be attacked because they were potentially fueling inflation. They'd be accused of keeping interest rates too high, that the Reserve Bank would not be able to lower interest rates fast enough. So faced with that as one alternative, with dealing with the pressures of cost of living and the pain that millions of Australians are feeling because of the idiocy of the Reserve Bank putting up interest rates when it shouldn't have, they've made a decision to go down the path of tweaking them, rebalancing them, taking $4,500 from those who are earning $180,000 plus and giving $800 to millions of Australians instead. But the key challenge here for the Prime Minister is, can he sell that message? Can he convince the vast majority of Australians that this is a better alternative to just going ahead with the tax cuts as they stood?
Michael, Australians don't forgive politicians who break their promises. Julia Gillard knows this all too well. Trust, once it's gone, is almost impossible to recover. And it's a bit rich, don't you think, of the government trying to spin these tax cuts, these tax hikes for over 1 million Australians as a cost of living measure?
Look, Sharri, yes, quite right. I'm actually shocked that he's done this. If he'd left the stage 3 tax cuts at the top end as they were, and that would have increased the deficit or reduced the surplus as it will be a bit, he should have done that. He would have got a lot of kudos. But all of those clips of him saying, we haven't changed our position, where my word is my bond, etc., oh my goodness. I mean, this is going to be a disaster for this bloke at the next election. Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. The middle-class earners who are getting $932 are going to take the money and say, you can't be trusted with any promise. So he promised not to increase super. He's now done this. He promised $275 energy relief by next year, which he won't deliver. I mean, I bet his hard-headed political advisors were saying to him over the last few days, mate, don't do this. This is Gillard on steroids, writ large. So this is a very dangerous decision for a Prime Minister to make, to take. And all this twaddle he goes on with, no, none of that spin will work. He made a promise. He said on many occasions these were set in stone, they were legislated, etc. And he's now bald-faced lied to people by breaking this promise. This is a very bad day for Albo, and it ain't going to help him in the polls.
Look, let's move on to Kim Williams, the new chair of the ABC. Stephen, you just heard the scathing assessment of the ABC from Kim Williams himself in his own book, published a decade ago. Do you think the lefties will be in for a shock when he gets there? And Stephen, I'm also interested in your own experience working with Kim Williams when you were the communications minister.
Look, Kim is an incredibly colourful character. It was get out the popcorn whenever he was turning up to a Senate Estimates Committee on behalf of News Limited or Foxtel. He was a passionate advocate of Foxtel and News Limited at the time. He was highly critical of the ABC. All of that's on the public record. I think you just read from his book some of his more colourful, and certainly in my experiences, he was even more colourful behind closed doors. I think his challenge will be not to be the new Jonathan Shire of the ABC, and to deal with the ABC's biases. They're essentially an inner city left-wing Liberal Party of New South Wales controlled organisation, along with a bit of the green tinge. I think that'll be a real challenge for Kim to manage. I think many people, and you've got Michael there, who's been on the board. Many people have believed that once they're on the board of the ABC, they can change the culture, they can change the staffing, they can interfere in decisions. And they often find that they're not able to do that because the charter, the rules, the good governance don't allow them to say, I like that show, I don't like that show, I like that presenter, I don't like that presenter. All of those sorts of challenges will be there for Kim to manage. I wish him all the best in trying to manage that ABC collective. And as I said, his challenge will be not to end up like Jonathan Shire with a full-scale revolt against the board.
Well, which is basically what happened at News Corp when it came to the editors because of the extreme reform that he was trying to implement. And as I said, I'm going to have Chris Mitchell on my show to speak about some of that tomorrow night. But Michael, Stephen just said that we haven't really seen a chair or any board directors who've been able to restore any balance to the ABC. It's a culture, a law unto itself. Do you think Kim Williams has not even the technical abilities, but the personality to be able to navigate those waters?
So I'd say two things. It's disappointing that a New South Wales person has been appointed. This is the 9th chair in a row, as far as I can see. 38 years of unbroken runs for someone from Sydney and New South Wales being appointed chair. 15 of the 19 managing chairs of the ABC going back to 1932, as far as I can see, have been from New South Wales. 3 from Victoria and 1 from Adelaide, putting aside the temporary chair that was from Queensland a few years ago. But 15 of the 19 have been from New South Wales in the last 92 years. Now, that tells you something. Having said that, if anyone is going to be able to break through, from what I've read about him today and what I've just seen you breaking news tonight showing, if anyone can do something, it would be Mr. Williams. I was on the board when Jonathan Shire was the managing director. I voted for Jonathan Shire. I'm glad I did. He came in with some serious reforms. And what might happen to Mr. Williams, as happened to Jonathan Shire, the staff collective quickly worked out that Jonathan Shire was not their friend, that he wanted to change the ABC. I think the staff will work out very quickly that Kim Williams is not their friend. He's not going to be an automaton sitting in his office twiddling his thumbs. Williams appears to have a record of being an activist leader, which is what you want in an ABC chair. And I'd simply say to him, you need to work out the resolutions and changes you want, get the board to endorse them and tell the managing director to implement them. And don't be scared. Don't be frightened off. Too many ABC board members, in my experience, think it's all too hard. And it's just all too hard. Well, the organisation has been in crisis. Ratings are tumbling. So many parts of the Australian audience no longer trust the ABC. It's in terminal decline, and it may need someone like Williams to fix it. So if they're going to have someone from New South Wales, he may well be the right person because he seems to be a bit fearless, and that's what they need.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that all pans out. I think everyone has a story about Kim Williams. I might tell mine sometime down the track. And Stephen Conroy, I have to say your name came up a lot in Kim Williams' book today, so maybe we'll have to do a part 2 tomorrow night. Now, the Fin Review has revealed that the Chinese warship that injured Australian divers with its sonar knew that there were Australian divers in the water. They were repeatedly warned, but they ignored those warnings. Stephen, what do these Freedom of Information documents obtained by the Fin Review show about how the Chinese pursued the Australian sailors, and also about how early the Prime Minister did know about this matter?
Well, 2 separate issues there. Firstly, again, China have completely lied and misled the broader world community about what transpired. And the evidence was always there. Australian officials had made it clear that this was a very dangerous activity that the Chinese warship undertook while they knew that the Australian divers were in there trying to free the ship from an entanglement. They went ahead and did it and put their lives at risk. So China have then attacked Australia, saying absolutely not, all lies, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can't believe what China say in the public world forums. You just have to discount it because they do not tell the truth. It is very simple and it's very straightforward. We know that, yeah, and you more than anyone have exposed Chinese lies over the last 2 years, to your enormous credit, Sharri.
Thank you so much.
In terms of the well, I don't think anyone's trying to pretend the Prime Minister didn't know before he had the meeting with Xi a few months ago. So I don't think anyone's trying to pretend that. The question has always been, was it raised? Did they have a discussion? Was it just an aside, as you can see on the screen at the moment, where they were just having a quick chat saying hello? Yeah. So I don't think anyone's pretended that the PM didn't know beforehand.
No, but these
documents always been,
did confirm that he was told about 24 hours after it happened. So you know, we've got to go, but just very quickly, Michael Kroger, I mean, it does, you know, show that he knew about this and he failed to raise it with the Chinese president.
Look, it looks as if he did know. He should have raised it, but Sharri, I take as much notice of any press releases or statements by the Chinese government as I do the Hamas Health Ministry. They're worth nothing, not a zack, not a jot. Yeah, no, exactly. And speaking of Hamas, Michael, I have to compliment you. You did a terrific job on your trip to Israel. You could be a seasoned Sky News reporter. It was brilliant. All right, Stephen Connery and Michael Kroger, great to see you both. Now, Woolworths had to take out newspaper adverts today to try calm down angry customers over their decision not to stock Australia Day products. This was a crisis all of their own making. Woolworths boss Brad Bertucci was grilled on his decision on Sunrise today.
It's making a political statement by not stocking Australia Day merchandise.
I don't think that's true, Natalie. So we're focusing on what we do best, which is food and everyday needs.
Doesn't sound like it's gone down well.
There are all different stakeholders out there, Natalie, that we all need to manage. It has not gone down badly. It's a decision we make collectively as a team.
Look, he claimed Woolworths customers didn't understand his message. That's not the problem. The problem is you, Brad Bertucci, and how out of touch woke executives like you are. Woolworths and other corporates should have learnt their lesson after The Voice, that Australians don't like being told how to think. They don't like being told that they shouldn't celebrate Australia Day. Former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson joins me now. Welcome to the program. Look, we have this debate every year. Why do activists who hate Australia so much try and ruin what is for many families just a wonderful public holiday?
Well, it's a very good question. One would have thought that The Voice might have caused people of intelligence and humility and the capacity to engage in a little self-reflection to say, are we in fact part of the problem? Let me illustrate. Many of them would be people who would tut at the idea of Trump becoming president of the United States again, without understanding that in many ways the turmoil in the US is the result of, if you like, the symptom of the underlying problem, which is that ordinary mainstream citizens feel disrespected, discounted, and are sick of being lectured to. So I can't understand why intelligent and thoughtful corporate leaders can't see that they are actually working against the very thing they say they're trying to achieve, a better society.
John Anderson, I think you're absolutely right. And not only that, you know, the Donald Trump success at the moment, and we're going to get to him in a moment. I've got Sean Spicer coming up. But, you know, his success is a reflection of the desperate Democratic efforts to pin him down in all those civil and criminal cases. But do you think, you know, Jeff Kennett was on with Steve Price earlier tonight, and he said he strongly supports Australia Day. He doesn't think the date should change, but he said maybe if there is going to be all of this fuss, it would be better just to change the date so Australians can have a day that they're allowed to celebrate how wonderful it is to live in this great country.
Well, the problem is that most Australians, we know from the research, support Australia Day and they support the current date, probably because they understand that for many activists, the idea of changing the date is really to hide their real objective, which is to say there ought not to be an Australian Day, that we shouldn't celebrate being Australian. I actually think there's a real problem here. This is flowing into a vacuum where there's not enough leadership, where people should be saying, our national leaders should be saying.
All right, I think we're struggling with your audio there. That's the former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson. We'll catch up with him another time. Now, coming up, Donald Trump beats Nikki Haley in New Hampshire as she refuses to withdraw from the race. Sean Spicer joins me next with the inside word on who Trump is looking at for his VP. That's after this break. Welcome back. Well, Nikki Haley did far better than expected against Donald Trump in the New Hampshire primaries. And yet there's heated debate in the Republican Party about whether Nikki Haley should withdraw from the race for the nomination altogether to allow the party to unite around Donald Trump. Haley held a press conference where she refused to back down. She went hard against the former president, even implying that he had mental competency issues just like Joe Biden.
With Donald Trump, you have one bout of chaos after another. This court case, that controversy, this tweet, that senior moment. You can't fix Joe Biden's chaos with Republican chaos. Now, I've long called for mental competency tests for politicians over the age of 75. Trump claims he'd do better than me in one of those tests. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But if he thinks that, then he should have no problem standing on a debate stage with me.
Nikki Haley clearly challenging Trump to a debate there. Well, the former president responded with his own scathing attack on her performance so far.
I'm up and I'm watching, and I said, she's taking a victory lap. And we beat her so badly, but Ron beat her also. You know, Ron came in second and he left. She came in third and she's still hanging around. The other thing, she only got 25% of the Republican votes. I don't know if you saw that.
One of Donald Trump's former press secretaries, Kayleigh McEnany, told Fox News that Nikki Haley could very well be staying in the race to try her hand at securing the VP nomination.
I know she says she's not running for second. I think this is a play for the vice presidential nomination. We must unite the Republican Party. I think she's playing for that.
All right, so you believe she's going to force the issue, drag this out, get some clout with some delegates going into the convention and leverage her way onto the ticket?
I think that is a real possibility.
Well, joining me now, another former spokesman for Trump, Sean Spicer. Great to see you again, Sean.
Always good to see you, Sharri.
Look, this is a very solid win for Donald Trump, but Nikki Haley still did better than many expected, even the polls. What did you make of her comments that, at this stage at least, she's refusing to withdraw?
Well, look, first of all, she has a right. I mean, you can stay in as long as you want. But the reality is, you notice she came out real quick. The vote that came in early was where she did better. The big suburbs of Boston, the Manchester, Concord, New Hampshire, those bedroom suburban communities just north of Boston. She knew she would do well where independents were going to play a big role. She made a couple of mistakes. Number one, Nevada is actually the next stop. She's just not on the ballot there, which kind of is perplexing. The second thing is South Carolina is 31 days away. And you look at the polls in South Carolina, she's down 30 points in the state that she was elected governor twice. And almost every major endorsement from the federal level, from the senators to the current governor to the state representatives are all with Trump. The problem is that I don't see a viable path forward for her. I get what she did. Even if she continues to go past South Carolina, Super Tuesdays, 10 states, 870 delegates at stake, and you have to be able to run more than one state. So she's been able to park herself, if you will, in one state, Iowa, then New Hampshire, and she wants to go home to South Carolina. But you can't run into, these are supposed to allow the process to have a little time to percolate. She doesn't have the capability to go into to Super Tuesday the way that Donald Trump does.
If there is no viable path for her to defeat Trump, as you say, through these primaries, is Nikki Haley then relying on an external factor like the Democrats throwing Trump in jail, something like that, to see her win the nomination? Is that what's going on here?
I think you're putting your finger on something. The interesting thing is, we like to say, is it the black swan event, something kind of akin to what you're talking about. The problem is that there's none of his court cases are actually at a point where any of that could possibly happen. So I get it, but it's like you're running just on the hope that maybe something happens. And if it did, I would actually have a better chance of seeing somebody else get back in the race. You notice they always use these words, I suspended my campaign. That means that they're technically still filed. They're on the ballots. They could jump back in theory. But I think you're onto something. That's the only thing that's keeping her in this race, is this idea that maybe something happens. And that's no way to run a campaign.
The other suggestion, and we just heard it from Kayleigh McEnany, is that perhaps Nikki Haley's trying to manipulate a situation where she could be asked to be Trump's running mate, his VP. What do you think of that notion?
Nothing is ever out of the question. I think Trump put it to rest the other day. She has said it. Bush ended up being Reagan's vice presidential nominee in the 80s. It's possible. I just don't see it. There's too much bad blood now between the two of them. She didn't want to stay on as his UN ambassador. I just don't get the vibe that she's ever really wanted to be Donald Trump's number two.
Vivek Ramaswamy, who's now supporting Trump, he said today that suspending her campaign would be the right thing for Nikki Haley to do for the country, for the United States. Do you agree with this?
Look, I think, as I said, I think it is inevitable that Donald Trump ends up our nominee, and the sooner we can turn to a general election where we can lay out that case between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, what 4 years of accomplishment under Donald Trump was like versus the 3 years that we've seen both domestically and internationally under President Biden. It's a very clear and easy case to make. I mean, she has a right to do it, but we're wasting time and money that could be focused on winning in November.
Looking at the Democrats, Joe Biden wasn't even on the primary ballot papers in New Hampshire. He attacks Trump for being undemocratic. He says this election is going to be about democracy. But then, Sean, what does it say that he was too scared to have his own name on the ballot paper?
It gets worse. They had the state of Florida literally canceled their primary. And then he and his team are trying to take Donald Trump off the ballot in the primary in several states, like in Colorado, Maine, not the general election yet. They're actually trying to keep him off the primary ballot. That's not democratic at all. And so to be lectured by these guys on democracy and democracy being under attack, when they're trying to inhibit people from actually casting a vote and being able to choose who they want, I think that's a real tell right there who's truly not supporting democracy.
Just finally, Sean, I know it's a long way off, but presuming Trump does win the Republican nomination, who do you think he would be looking at to be his VP? Do you think he'd be thinking about a woman, as seems to be the model these days?
You know, Sharri, that is a fantastic question. I have a podcast, The Sean Spicer Show, and I talked about it today. I've talked about it almost every day. I think that there are 4 people that I put on that list right now. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the current governor of Arkansas, my former deputy, Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from New York, Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee. There's a journalist named Mark Halperin. He really believes that Katie Britt, the new junior senator from Alabama, is going to be high on that list. I think all 5 of those would be people I'd keep my eye on. I think J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, is somebody that I would also keep my eye on. There's a few others. Ben Carson, who served as his HUD secretary, is somebody who's very high. Mike Pompeo, potentially, who served as State Department Secretary of State and CIA director. Those are what I see the short list. I think we're not big into identity politics on the right, but I do think that a woman would probably help soften him as he looks to get votes in key suburbs in places like Pennsylvania and Detroit, Atlanta.
Sean Spicer, always terrific to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
Coming up, Albanese officially breaks his stage 3 tax cuts promise. His excuses have left us all exhausted. I'll be joined by my political panel next. I'm also going to cross live to Israel after it endured its deadliest day since October 7. Welcome back. Well, if Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is trying to soft launch his campaign ahead of what we presume will be next year's federal election, it's not off to a great start. He wanted a reset after the difficulties, the scandals of last year. He's now got a new mission to finally tackle the cost of living crisis, the same crisis he ignored for months, but he's already gone and broken a key election promise that Labor committed to ahead of 2 elections. This is setting the stage for tomorrow's National Press Club address from the Prime Minister. He was already grilled by press gallery journalists today about his broken promise. Well, to discuss all of this, I'm joined by National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie and Executive Director of Menzies Research Centre, David Hughes. David, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sharri.
Now, you are a political insider. You've worked on many Liberal Party election campaigns. You must look at this comment from the Prime Minister over 100 times. He committed to those stage 3 tax cuts. He said they were legislated. He said his word was his bond. Now he's breaking that promise. He's going to try argue to Australians that he's doing so for their own benefit. Do you think he's going to be able to sell this message?
Well, what Australians really need is a dedicated plan to get inflation under control. That's the meaningful way to deal with cost of living. So I don't think we're going to see that from this Prime Minister. We haven't seen it over the last 18 months or so. As recently as last Friday, the Prime Minister committed to delivering the stage 3 tax cuts in full. So this is an integrity issue for the Prime Minister. There's 1.7 million Australians, by my calculations, who will now be worse off on account of this broken promise. Many of them will change their vote.
Right, so they've said it's 1 million, but you actually think it's closer to 2 million, 1.7.
Yes, so every Australian every Australian taxpayer earning over $150,000 will be worse off from what's been proposed by Labor based on what we've seen. We'll find out the full details tomorrow, of course, and what was legislated, what is currently law. So that will be around 1.7 million Australians. And of course, with bracket creep, that grows every day, every year. So we'll be looking at a significant number of Australians who will be worse off as a result of these changes.
Look, it's the low and middle income earners that Labor's trying to help here with the cost of living relief. They will get some additional benefit, even though they have already had stage 1 and stage 2 tax cuts. Do you think there's any chance at all that Labor has done this because it's worried in part about the Dunkley by-election?
Well, look, it's possible, but I think, as I said, there's 1.7 million voters who will be worse off. They were promised tax cuts that now won't be delivered. So they were promised something that's now going to be taken away. And I think they're more likely to change their vote than the cohort of voters on lower incomes that weren't promised extra cash necessarily, but are now getting it. So I think there's a real risk here. And there's an integrity issue that cuts across low-income, high-income voters as well. They're now seeing a government that promised something before the election, that promised something as recently as last Friday, that is now failing to deliver that. So I think that's something that will affect all voters, including voters in Dunkley.
How do you think Peter Dutton's going in terms of his ability to claw back some of the seats? I mean, the Liberals are 22 seats behind. They need to make up 22 seats. Albanese is doing really badly. The defeat of The Voice, the many lack of transparency scandals, Israel, there's so many things that various sections of the community are angry with him over. But 22 seats, that does seem too big of an ask for Dutton to make up just in one term.
It's a big task, Sharri. It reminds me, and you were around as a working journalist in his time, Kevin Rudd. Now, voters started to turn on Kevin Rudd because of some significant broken promises. And that's what we're seeing now. So it really does cut through. It's a big task, as you said, and we'll have an election potentially in the next 12 months. I think Peter Dutton is doing well. Of course, I would say that I did used to work for him. I think he's doing very well, but there's still a long way to go.
All right, let's bring in National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie now. Bridget, Labor MPs have all been called back to Canberra at a cost of potentially $500,000. We're seeing different estimates for a caucus meeting this afternoon. The caucus meeting was probably unnecessary because this amendment to Stage 3 had already passed through Cabinet. You know, do you think this expense of bringing the politicians back to Canberra during a cost of living crisis was necessary?
Well, it's just not a good look, is it, Sharri, when people are trying to balance their own household budgets past a very expensive Christmas on the top of record mortgage increases over the last 12 months. And I think Australians are absolutely sick to death of prime ministers who say one thing before the election and do another thing after. And that's exactly what Anthony Albanese has done. He has completely disrespected the pact between him as Prime Minister and the Australian people with breaching this promise. And, you know, as David was saying, these tax cuts, this is the third stage of a tranche of tax cuts which really were focused on lower and middle income earners but sought to deal with that structural issue in our taxation system which really impacts and affects people over the long term, over the decade. These were never designed and carefully calibrated to solve an inflation issue of the government's making in 2024. They were very much designed to be fair tax system for all working Australians over the coming decade, and that is being breached by the Prime Minister and Cabinet's decision today.
Yeah, and several economists have said that, you know, having some tax relief, particularly in the high income bracket, is not inflationary. Now, I've been reporting this week about teachers. Oh, sorry, Bridget, I was just going to move on to another topic here. I've been reporting
sorry, good, all good.
On the program this week about teachers in New South Wales bringing the Gaza war into public schools. Now we learn today that teachers and school staff for Palestine in Victoria are doing the same thing, and they're pushing for pro-Palestinian content to be added to English and history classes in schools. You heard in the audio recordings that I played you on Monday night that in New South Wales there's discussions about bringing the Gaza conflict into maths lessons as well. David, the Education Minister there, Ben Carroll in Victoria, is so far refusing calls from the Jewish community to cancel a forum that's happening on Monday night to put a stop to this. Do you think that both, I mean, Chris Minns in New South Wales has been brilliant overall, but do you think that both governments in Victoria and New South Wales aren't being strong enough on this issue of teachers who are insisting on being advocates, not in their free time, that's fine, but in the classroom?
I agree, Sharri, and look, this is horrific to see the way that this is going. I want to see our education departments focused on reading, writing, the basics. They're not doing that. 20 years ago, Australia ranked 4th internationally when it came to reading. We're now 16th. And of course, this starts in the universities as well when we're training our teachers. They're often focused on social theory, politics is creeping in as well. So those fundamentals really need to change. And as a parent as well, I'm deeply concerned.
Yeah. Bridget, do you think we need to see leadership here from the Federal Education Minister, Jason Clare?
Well, it's a national curriculum, Sharri, you're dead right. I mean, rather than pro-Palestinian curricula, I would prefer to see pro-democracy curricula and actually supporting freedom and the privileges that we enjoy in a liberal democracy, not supporting a country that is governed by an organised, recognised terrorist organisation that actually has blatantly attacked our own allies. So I think getting back to the basics, obviously, as David says, but we need to see Jason Clare step up to the mark here and give some direction to our teachers, to our public institutions, to make sure that we're teaching pro-democracy education, not following, I guess, that very left-wing political agenda that's indoctrinating so many of our young Australians.
Exactly. It's bringing discrimination to the young generation just because these teachers are radicalised. Bridget McKenzie, David Hughes, thank you so much for joining me. After the break, how the deadliest day in Israel's war on Hamas unfolded. Israeli politician Sharon Haskell will join me live from Israel. Welcome back. Well, 24 Israeli soldiers were killed in combat in southern Gaza in the single deadliest day for Israel since October 7. Sharon Haskell is an Israeli MP. She's a regular on the show and joins me now. Sharon, good to see you again. Look, what do we know about...
Hello, Sharri.
What do we know about how this unfolded and some of the 21 Israeli soldiers who were killed?
Yeah, this is a devastating day. We had such a huge loss, and it is mainly because Israel is trying to do surgical operation to capture Hamas without harming any civilian. And while we do that, instead of clearing the area completely, either from the air or with tanks, it's specific surgical operation that the soldiers are going in order to eliminate whether it is tunnels or houses that have facilitated Hamas. And unfortunately, this was an RPG that was shot towards a group of soldiers who are doing a specific mission, and the entire house had collapsed on them. It's heartbreaking, and we're going now from funeral to funeral and from home to home, and it is very difficult when something like that happens. We know that in war, there isn't a real win. Everybody loses. And we try to avoid a war. We didn't want that war. It was forced on us in order to defend our family and our friends.
We're hearing various reports about different, potential ceasefire deals from both sides, from both Hamas and from Israel. There's reports that Israel has proposed allowing senior Hamas terrorists to leave Gaza as part of a broader ceasefire deal. Is this accurate? And if so, what's the thinking behind this?
So we've been trying to bring a few deals to bring back our hostages. This is one of our goals. I mean, the reason why we're in there and the reason why I think we need to pound Hamas as hard as possible is to force them to come into a deal that will release our family members that are being kept as hostages there. I mean, we know now from evidence about the abuse that they're going through. They're being drugged, they're being physically attacked, sexually attacked. It's a complete nightmare, and we'll do anything in order to release them as quickly as possible. But Hamas is refusing to come into any kind of agreement at this point. There's certain talks that Qatar and Egypt is going to bring something soon.
Sharon Haskell, I apologise. We're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and here's Paul Murray.